And you're live.
To another dev duel. I have Glenn Morris, who is assisting or creating the mod for Shadowrun Hong Kong, known as World Without Walls. How's it going, Glenn?
I'm doing
Welcome.
fantastic.
Thank you for setting aside any time at all, which is obviously now, to talk with us. We really appreciate it. It's always fun to get on and kind of like talk to developers of games and see where they kind of got their ideas from, where the creation idea came from. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually let you dive right in. Why did you choose to make a mod for Shadowrun specifically?
Well, that was almost chosen for me, really. I mean, I say we, I'm the writer, director, producer, level designer, and so forth, but it's not a one-man project with a list of credits of just my name. There's actually been 14 people over the course of the entire thing that have worked on it. And right now we're at 6, but for a while, for reasons that I'll get into, we were like a whole huge group of people with a limited time frame to get whatever we wanted to get done then. And then some of us went on and took it in the direction that World Without Walls is now.
Gotcha.
And essentially, I prior to making the game, I developed a pre-production process to try to find sort of a middle ground between two or more creative artists. I'd worked a little bit in animation before, where I would prepare pitches for a series to get picked up by the Cartoon Network or whatever. I think the closest we ever got with that was, if you're familiar with the show Chowder.
Yeah. A lot of interesting textures and kind of like character movements in that show. It was very unique.
We didn't do Chowder.
Okay.
Chowder's what beat us to that time slot. So I have a little bit of an animosity towards that. But anyway, I'd find out working with the animators, other writers, artists, that it would be too late in the process when we kind of figure out that we had opposite ideas about what the thing was, or whereas one person would sort of see it their own way based on their own personal taste, and I would see it my own way with my personal taste, but we'd think we were on the same page until the end. So I developed this sort of process to find a middle ground for people to work in it, like a data analysis tool for collaboration, really. And a friend of mine was an artist. We very much wanted to work together on something. So nice. I went through this process, and Cyberpunk was in the results of the data everywhere that I looked. A lot of different stuff came into it. John Hughes films, like
right.
Yeah, right. Like
I was gonna say I watched the little video a few times, that 3-minute introduction you had where you explained that you had a kind of aggregate data of words that went put in, and then it kind of went towards movies, and then as an extension beyond that, it was certain quotes from movies from the words you have chosen. I thought that was an extremely unique approach.
Thank you.
To creating a story, because it wasn't necessarily just from scratch. I kind of like that you kind of in a certain way used like math to figure out the story. I think that's really fascinating.
And I can talk about that, and I can go into that a lot. I think I'm having difficulty answering a straightforward question or explaining the entire thing that we did prior to the project, which was a couple thousand hours really of work and a pre-production thing. But the short answer to the question is that pointed to a list of recommendations for where myself and this artist could start. And Ghost in the Shell came up on there.
Yeah.
Some more obscure cyberpunk stuff came up on there. And so we knew that we would be best fit for the cyberpunk thing. It's just luck, really, that now there's this resurgence of cyberpunk that you're seeing in culture.
Definitely.
With the new Blade Runner and the Ghost in the Shell remake, however successful.
That was a movie that was made by people.
Yeah. I hope.
We can forget it. We can forget about that one. But the new Blade Runner, I'm all for that.
It was I've done three times already. I've seen that.
Nice. Oh.
But the Duncan Jones, the director of Moon, he's coming out with one called Mute. which I actually talked to him about when I met him like 6-7 years ago. And so that's something that I know he's been trying to get off the ground for a long time.
Right, and that's Moon, the movie with Sam Rockwell, where they kind of do the replicating of clones and constantly kind of forgetting their memories, so they keep harvesting the moon rocks and whatnot.
A little bit of a spoiler there, but yeah.
I don't mind. People can be spoiled. You just go enjoy the movie anyway, because there's a lot more to it than just that. But that is a fantastic movie.
Yeah. He also did Warcraft.
That I mean, in fairness, it was pretty much exactly what I thought Warcraft was going to be. It was a very high detailed CG movie about a story in the place where Warcraft takes place, where I can't remember.
Yeah. Almost Azeroth? Is that?
Yeah, that sounds pretty like the world, I believe. I think you're right.
That's either one planet or
a continent or whatever it is. But in the same respect, I didn't think it was like bad. It just wasn't anything special.
Good. I haven't seen it yet, but anyway, it was just sort of luck that Cyberpunk became the thing. I think a lot of people think that we're riding a wave. But this was chosen for us based on stuff that came out in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
Because there was sort of two waves of Cyberpunk. The original wave, which started as a literary movement, and sort of a 90s resurgence that had a lot of really terrible movies to come out. And
like Demolition Man and
which I respect on a lot of levels, but not wrong. The Demolition Man, Virtuosity, Johnny Mnemonic. Yeah, there was even a New Rose Hotel with Christopher Walken.
Oh yeah, that's right.
But anyway, that kind of like burst the bubble, and now we're seeing a third wave basically of Cyberpunk. And I'm a huge fan of traditional role-playing games, the classic turn-based, heavy text-based games. And so when I thought about like, all right, I want to make a mod. I've always wanted to make a mod. What games out there have some of the assets to get us started, some of the framework ready to make a cyberpunk experience? Yeah. And I really only had two choices. One was wait until Cyberpunk 2077 releases by the creators of The Witcher. You're familiar with tabletop. You know the Cyberpunk games, I take it.
Yeah, I do. I've been trying to keep up with the new CD Red Project game, although it was a little weird. I think it was 2 months ago they got hit by some hackers, which was really unfortunate.
Yeah, they leaked some early stuff, I think.
There we go. That's what it was.
Design documents.
But then otherwise, there's been a few other games that kind of come to mind with Cyberpunk.
Many.
Shadowrun specifically, I run a show here on TorchFork Mob called Retrohaven, where I attempted to beat the Super Nintendo Shadowrun.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, that has virtually nothing to do with Shadowrun. But it was still kind of a fun experience, and they really did try at the time to expand upon what they could, but it just didn't really, Data East just couldn't really like pull through with what they were creating at the time and just the software that they had. But then I didn't really, I haven't, unfortunately, read Neuromancer or anything like that, too. I really want to and will. I just have, like everyone else, this large of a list of books, to read.
I'm slowly working my way through them.
Yeah, I mean, really.
Purposes, really. I mean, I had read Neuromancer prior, and the manga for Ghost in the Shell.
Yep.
I mean, now I go to get into the pile, really.
Yeah, that's right.
But hey, I mean, the SNS project, that I think that nostalgia for that is a lot of what allowed the Harebrained Schemes thing to happen.
Without a doubt. That and the Sega Genesis version of it also, I completely agree.
Right. Whereas I think there's an Xbox multiplayer game that probably has even less to do with Shadowrun.
Yeah,
it's called Shadowrun.
I remember seeing that and being like, okay. I didn't own an Xbox at the time. Still don't, actually. I'm not a huge Xbox fan myself.
Me neither.
And but I always wanted to try it. But then, later, whenever I finally caught on about it and started reading about it, just kind of seeing the exponentially poor reviews was kind of... It just kind of stunk because I wanted to play a game like that again. And then, then they released on Steam and wherever else, they released Shadowrun Online. which I played for a while, and I actually still play it here and there. They did the 5th edition conversion to Boston Chronicles,
Yeah.
which is fun, and I do have a group of friends that I play with that does make the experience more fun because we get to create our own characters. But still, the game was so
Right.
simplistic that it only rose to about 3/4 of even what the Shadowrun Returns games did. And that kind of once again leads up to what I was saying about how I was always playing those games wanting more in the end. And like when Dragonfall came out and I found out like I couldn't convert my character from Returns to that, I was like, okay, well, I guess I'll play a new character, but that kind of stinks. And the same with Hong Kong. And I don't know, I just like still want to be more immersed in a more cyberpunk world, and the Returns games were really doing it for me, so I'm just excited to play the mod here.
Yeah, and which was originally actually a prototype that we did was in the Dragonfall editor, and
nice.
Porting that over to Hong Kong actually was a bit of a process.
Gotcha.
So it just reminded me what you were saying about being able to get your character in there and everything. We had some things that we were definitely trying to move over from one to the other in the early days.
And it just wasn't that it didn't work out as easy as you thought it was going to.
We've been talking, and I haven't really explained that our mod World Without Walls is essentially Shadowrun Boston. In the same way that Shadowrun Returns was Seattle, and Dragonfall did Berlin, and then Hong Kong obviously did Hong Kong. We are doing Boston, and we have trouble sometimes with people who aren't too familiar with differentiating ourselves from the Boston Lockdown multiplayer game, because people say see Shadowrun Boston and they're like, oh yeah, I played your game.
Right. Oh, that's right. I see where that confusion could be a little. That can affect you sometimes. So, like, expanding on the Boston theme, why did you choose Boston? And is there a good Boston? Let's actually start there. Let's start there. Why did you choose Boston as the theme?
Well, I mean, the easy answer would be because I live here, but it actually was a choice that I had to think about, because when we started this game, we were a group of students, and we were going on a trip to London to work, and London is much more supported, I would say, in the Shadowrun universe when it comes to the tabletop source book material, getting an idea for what that world is and how it functions and such. Not that Boston is non-existent, but prior to this recent sort of zombie-themed Boston Lockdown tabletop stuff that then got turned into that multiplayer game with the 5th edition, there was really only like a third of one book to come out. It was about the UCAS, the United Canadian and American States.
Yeah, the UCAS. That's right, because that's the upper Northwest.
Yep,
that's right.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a split of different factions in the United States of America, and that one, I think Chicago, Boston, and Denver were the ones that they were dealing with.
Yep.
I could be wrong about Denver. That could have been another book. I've read a lot of them.
They've done Chicago. Seattle was a big... Seattle's a big city in Shadowrun 2, but that's because Seattle is still controlled by humans, where the rest of it is surrounded by Shir and Gare, which is the Elven lands. So I know that kind of plays a major role in it. I know that Chicago is a major city in Shadowrun because it's where the Fab 3 magic nuke was created.
Yeah.
And then
Bug City,
that's right.
Yeah.
And then oh man, there was something about Boston. So even in my tabletop game, we've had to visit Boston for various reasons. So it's because a faction of priest fighters that were created were from there. That's what it was. But
there are a lot of books that reference the Boston Metroplex, as they call it. So it's not non-existent, but in terms of like dedicated, this is what to do with Boston if you're going to be in this world. It's really just 1/3 of a book called Target UCAS. For the older ones. And the Harebrained Schemes games, as you know, take place in the 2050s. Yeah. And so that is the lore that I wanted to work with. So a lot of that Boston material to come up recently is 2070s stuff. And I've read all that material, and sometimes they will refer to things that have been around for a while, so that's helpful. But
Definitely.
most of it doesn't really apply to what we're doing. I also want to be
Gotcha.
clear that what we're doing with Boston is not adapting the tabletop quests and stories and such to the Shadowrun editor. We have an original story, original characters, original artwork, original everything.
That's the best.
But I also, attention to detail is something that I strive for, and there's a world there, and so you want to make sure that you're not stepping on any toes when it comes to like, oh, who's in charge of the Italian mob? Like, he has a name. You can't just make something up if it's going to take place in that world in that time frame. So there's a little bit, there's reference, a lot of reference to things that people who are fans of Shadowrun and familiar with the Boston setting there will understand. Is from there's also novelizations. A lot of the books, a lot of the Techno Babylon is one of them. Like a lot of those novels that they came out with, sort of like D&D had novels as well.
Yeah, of course. I've read almost all the Dragonlance books myself.
Ah, okay. Yeah. I think there's a movie coming now, actually.
I hope there's like all that talk of either a movie or a show, and they made a cartoon movie years ago that was terrible, but that's besides the point. It's really I would say that it's respectable of you to do that, because that doesn't happen too often, where there is a system created either in literature or a board top game, or on the off chance music, anything like that. There's not a lot of like pure conversion, and what I mean by that is you looked into the story, like the history and what was going on in this specific part of the Shadowrun universe in the United States, and you like stuck to what was going on there.
More or less.
They just don't do it that well that often. Where I believe like 3 years ago there was a game, Sword Coast Legends, that came out. It was supposed to be a terrific multiplayer D&D game, and it really just fell flat because they didn't stick to any of the real lore that had been created through now 5th editions of Dungeons and Dragons. So people were not only unimpressed with bad gameplay, but the story wasn't compelling either.
I think that comes down to understanding your audience and respecting your audience, because when you're talking about something like Shadowrun, I think a lot of people criticize the game system of the tabletop game quite a bit, but the setting is what people are really in it for. And so the setting and the lore, and it's something that people know. It's not. I'm not gonna say that we're flawless. I mean, I'm sure someone's gonna bring up something that I missed. There's only so much you can absorb of the tabletop books, because there are hundreds of them.
Yes.
But we're doing our best to understand who Richard Villers is and who Tommy Talon is, and not to have them be necessarily characters that play a major part in the plot, but they're forces that
work in the world and everything else.
And just kind of you're on the end of a ripple effect, basically, when you're working in a world like that.
Yep.
And you have to understand where those ripples are coming from, or else you're just going to be off the mark and people will know it.
Yeah. That's a really great way of putting it. You're the end part of that ripple. That's a very, very accurate.
And so Boston was ultimately chosen. We thought, it would be fun to look at London as part of our project, because we're going to be there starting it. And I went to Paris after that, and I love Paris, so I thought about that too. But Boston is my home, and that means, and we were all Northeastern University students who were doing this, so we were all coming back to the same place.
Oh, wow.
And we started Boston knowing that, particularly for our environment artists, because we do original environment art that we import into the editor, we can keep going back, taking photographs, noticing like patterns of people and crowds. Like, granted, this is projected into the 2050s, so things are going to be different in a lot of cases.
Of course.
But we need the reference that Google Maps helps with, particularly now that you can sort of control a camera to an isometric perspective when we're doing
exactly.
when we're at that was a good day for me. When I discovered that function was going to allow me to see the city, because I'm designing maps for Downtown Crossing, Chinatown, the Seaport District.
Oh yeah.
It's one thing to go there and take photos with your phone. It's another thing to be able to see like how the buildings are spaced out, and then
The
to do
dimension of it. Yeah, totally.
And we do sort of like a Las Vegas style world with ours, in the sense that you know how Vegas will have the Eiffel Tower and the pyramids and everything. It's like the cultures of the world condensed into a gaudy casino atmosphere. And so what we're doing is, because the maps are fairly small in a game like Shadowrun and fairly boxed in, so we'll take in elements from other neighborhoods, as long as it makes sense in terms of like the player feel of this is in this direction and in relation to this other thing. Then a lot gets sort of brought in to our maps, into a tighter Boston setting.
I gotcha. That's very cool. I noticed when I was kind of looking at the breakdown of a lot of this stuff that you did exactly what you said, you know, taking actual locations and putting them in. That also, like, that's just very, very fun. You know, they did, just as another side example, because I like to use references for everything because it makes people understand things easier, is, you know, in Assassin's Creed 2, they took the full scale, I believe, of whatever town it was in Italy.
Yeah.
And recreated it. Well,
probably Venice, although it's been a long time since I've looked at that game.
Me too. Well, when I was playing, my girlfriend, who is another member of TFM, Ohia Lehua, she had been to Italy for a year, and when I was playing, she said, like, oh, I recognize that place, and she had me get up on higher points and look out, and she'd be like, oh, I recognize that mountain. And I thought that was such a cool thing that they did, and that should be replicated more. So it's always appreciated, I think, on the gamer side when we see the developers actually take the time to do something like that. Not only have good gameplay and good story, but actually make the game look representable also, which is really cool. Just really cool. And the other thing too, or the other thing I wanted to, from that kind of expand on is there a good indie scene in Boston in terms of games? You know, as one that doesn't live there, I live on the opposite side of the country in Portland, Oregon. Yeah. What is it like? Is the indie scene in Boston hopping?
It's interesting. And before I get into that though, I just want to say I have my own sort of story like that. And in that, when I was playing Grand Theft Auto 4, I was looking for a specific staircase in New York City, which is really what that game is, because I was a film critic for a couple of years. And I wrote my very first film review on this staircase that has like a sentimental value to me. Like that staircase is where I started 2 years of film criticism. And so I went driving around and I went to where it should have been and it wasn't there and I was disappointed. And then I drove around a bit and, you know, maybe 2 blocks down or 1 block, even just 1 block down, like you just had to kind of like come at a different street from a different direction. And I found it. And it was very clearly that place. And so that's kind of like my inspiration for what I'm doing with these boxed-in levels is you won't find everything exactly where it's supposed to be, but together it all sort of gives the feel of that place. And you can find specific Boston things, but they might not be exactly where you expect them to be. As for the indie scene of Boston, it's very interesting right now. I know you guys interviewed the developer of Perception.
We did.
Developers, right.
Yeah.
They are one of many right now that essentially spawned off into little companies after Irrational Games that did the BioShock titles closed down. So, I mean, there's A Flame in the Flood is a recent game. That's also, it's like a survivalist, a lot of Kickstarter projects. Not all of them made it off the ground, but there have been some very interesting Kickstarter projects as well. We Happy Few, I don't know if they're in Boston, but I know they came out of that as well.
Gotcha.
Right now, there's Other Side Entertainment, which is very interesting. Other Side is not only a lot of people from that BioShock closure, but it's actually the original people that led to Irrational before it closed. So
interesting.
If you're familiar with the immersive sim genre, that all happened here. Basically, there was Ultima Underworld is what is considered to have started it, and that led it, and that at a company that would later be known as Looking Glass Studios, they did Thief.
There we go.
They did System Shock, the original one.
Nice, great game.
Yeah, and so they've done they were co-creators, I believe, of System Shock 2, along with this new company Irrational, which essentially became a thing because there were some layoffs at Looking Glass, and people still wanted to do this, so they had to sort of create their own company called Irrational Studios, led by Ken Levine there, and and so you had this Looking Glass eventually closed down. They had the people who worked there have gone in different directions. I know some of them went on to Austin and did Deus Ex and some sequels to games like the Deus Ex Invisible War and
that game is so fun.
Thief 3 and so you have this immersive sim thing spawning out of Boston. Arcane Studios, I think the guy who created that was like a QA guy at Looking Glass originally. So people did sort of leave Boston in that sense, but a lot of the originals were still here. Paul Neurath lives in Massachusetts. I don't think there's any way to pry him out of this place. And he started up this new company called Other Side, and they're now doing spiritual successor to Underworld Ascendant, and they're also doing System Shock 3.
Wow, awesome.
So not the System Shock remake, but a third System Shock. An
actual third one. Yeah.
Yeah. So you have people sort of like, a company closes, but they're all sort of still working together. They're all still sort of like, they just move from other companies and come back into others. And a lot of that, I think the next sort of explosion that you might see in indie games is probably going to be, I think, the immersive sim. I know Ken Levine also is working on something right now that nobody knows anything about. He's rebranded to Ghost Story Games.
Interesting.
That is Irrational Studios, but it's also like 25, 30 developers right now. Maybe that's even overshooting it. They're starting off very small. They don't want to ever get as big as Bioshock Infinite ever again. I don't.
Right.
Because that was an ordeal.
There's a huge amount of people who are making that game.
Yeah, so being from Boston, I've been looking at those games more and more recently as I've understood the history of it. And previously, I only understood Boston as from the perspective of mobile games because I'd worked on some of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I knew there was a strong mobile game development community here in Boston. But now there's also this sort of resurgence, I think, of the immersive sim, and a lot of those people are still here working on that.
I got you.
We lost ground in RTS though. I know there used to be an interesting city for real-time strategy games, but
yeah,
I don't think any of those exist anymore. I actually my first professor at Northeastern, I was in the games program there, although that's a whole nother story. He was the co-creator of Age of Empires, the original.
Oh my god, that's awesome. Oh, I played the living crap out of those games when I was a kid.
and Stainless Steel Studios was here, which he may have been involved in, and they did Empire Earth. And
okay.
I could be wrong about this, but maybe Rise of Nations. I don't know. But yeah, that's sort of Boston is made up of RTS developers, immersive sim developers, and these new mobile game companies that are coming up, doing very well.
You just get them all together and you make some mobile immersive game RTSs. No, I'm just joking. But
well, I mean, the immersive sim itself is a hybrid genre, right? So I think that is what the developers here are most interested in is hybrid genres.
I believe that 100%. Okay, so I do have just one last question as we'll lead off the end of the interview. And, we've kind of talked, I do appreciate, again, you spending time to talk with us here at TorchFork Mob about the Shadowrun World Without Walls. Utterly excited for it to come out, and it's going to be episodic, correct?
It is, yeah. We're going to be releasing towards the end of the year a prologue chapter, essentially.
Nice.
And that's been done for a little while now. There's just a little bit of polish that we want to do on it.
Awesome.
And then that should be by the end of the year, and then Act 1, essentially. Not that I think I'm going to get through all 3 necessarily. They are self-contained things, but I still call it internally as Act 1 because I see where it would go as a trilogy kind of deal. But that would be the Downtown Crossing and Chinatown areas.
Cool.
And a lot of that work, a lot of our work has been focused on that, with a little bit already prepared for quote unquote Act 2 if there is one.
Excellent.
Which there probably will be, because I don't see any of us wanting to leave anytime soon. But yeah. For Shadowrun Hong Kong specifically, you need that game. But Steam sale comes around, it's $5, you know?
Yeah, exactly. So. All right. Well, so what I did want to ask is just, it's a super light question, but always fun to ask every developer that has ever made any games ever. What were your favorite games when you were a kid? What games did you play led to this point? Yeah. The original Fallout is a fantastic game.
That's the one.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I'm actually.
I have to say also, you're probably I've interviewed quite a few devs, not 100, not 50, but quite a few, and not one has mentioned Fallout yet. So please lay it on me. Why Fallout? Why did Fallout lead to Shadowrun World Without Walls?
Well, I mean, as I said, I was into film before as a career, and that was kind of like where I saw myself going. But I always knew that the original Fallout game, and it was more to me. It was more than I had gotten out of film. Even the greats. There was something about it. There was something about it that was just different. But I wasn't pursuing a career in games at that time. I was someone who saw the older kids playing Dungeons and Dragons, but I didn't really understand what it was and what they were doing. Cast a fireball. I thought people just sort of like shouted out things at a table. But once I played Fallout, I started to understand like the system, the mechanics of it, the way that everything is sort of connected in terms of data to represent like the world, basically, in an adventure context, granted, but character creation and things like Fallout, and there were plenty of RPGs before Fallout, but they didn't, I don't think, have the depth of character creation and reactivity to choices.
Definitely.
And I think I would call that the first that really had a deep system. It was before Baldur's Gate even, I think.
Yep, Fallout. I believe the first Fallout came before, or 2 to 3 years before Baldur's Gate. I would need to fact check that myself, but I believe that's what it is.
So the Black Isle Studios stuff and the other titles I'm absolutely in love with too, but it was Fallout that really got me into it, and I was still working in film when I attended the very first PAX East, and I met Chris Avallone, who did writing on the second Fallout. He created the New Reno level, I believe.
Oh.
And he also created the Fallout Bible, which is sort of this community resource for the lore. And I met him, and I found him to be a lot more inviting and interested in sort of who you are and what you wanted to do and what you cared about. And I'd actually conducted a lot of interviews in film where people weren't really interested in that personal connection. Like, you were both there to do a job, and it wasn't like, oh, you're a celebrity or anything. It was more like, oh, okay, we're both here, we both have to do this thing, this is how we're going to do this thing, and then we're done. Whereas I felt like Chris gave me an idea of what the game developer community was like, where it was kind of a more of a family, I would say. And that's where I decided this is where I want to go, this is what I want to do. And so I wouldn't say I owe it all to him, because I was already kind of leaning that way, but that's like a significant moment. And the Fallout series was the significant game.
Gotcha.
To get me into this.
That's awesome. Terrific. I mean, that's a great choice. great games all around. 1 through 4, New Vegas, they're all fun. I want to ask also, before it just completely slips from my mind, how long were you in film? And what I mean by that is, I heard you were a critic and everything else. As a generality, how long were you in film before you made the switch over to the game industry?
I mean, I was only 2 years as any kind of professional, but my entire life I've been a cinemaphile. And, since this was your last question, there isn't really time to get into it, but the pre-production process that I talked about at the beginning, which is a whole involved thing that I'd have to get into, is very much focused on film and television, cyberpunk stuff, because that's where the data is available for what I was working with. And what comprises this mod in terms of narrative work, which is largely what I'm doing, because I have help on the other things. Like, I'm not the only level designer. I do the majority, but the narrative is all me, and that is approached from a perspective of references in a way where you will understand the tropes or the subversion of tropes, or see various references, even actor inspirations for the portrait artists when I'm working with them.
Awesome.
This is definitely a game for Shadowrun fans, I would say. It's a game for RPG fans. World Without Walls is a mod that probably offers more than most of the mods that are out there right now.
Awesome.
For the trilogy, and because we are all in with it, but it's also an interesting experience, I think, or would be, or will be, for film fans, cinephiles, tell people who like the cyberpunk sort of stuff, and not just cyberpunk, but other things that worked its way into that process as well, where you will get various thoughts going through it about, like, where did that come from, or what does this remind me of? It's kind of like a meta thing in a way. Like, you're dealing with the history of cyberpunk in film and television and novels, as well as playing as the cyberpunk game.
Nice. Well, that's terrific. And man, that's just great. I don't know if I can't think of any more synonyms for great and good, but it really is. Well, that is going to be the conclusion of this interview. Glenn, I once again, for the third time, want to thank you for spending time interviewing me. Excuse me.
It's what I'm used to doing.
Setting aside time for the interview.
Yeah, this is actually my first. This is I was trying to keep the game away from the press, actually, for a long time, because I knew, like, once I opened those floodgates, I'd have to, have all this on my schedule, answer all the questions, like, have prepared answers, things like that. But yeah, so that this is my first time talking with an audience outside of Boston, really.
Awesome.
Although I've done a lot of speaking things about the game and about the pre-production process here, but I guess now it begins. Now the press begins, and we can get the word out there. Moddatabase.com. You cannot download the game yet because it's not out, but we do have some screenshots up there.
Everything you can check out. Yep.
I'll be doing the developer blog thing through that.
Nice.
Now that the world knows.
Now that the entire world is aware. Well, yeah, we really do appreciate it.
I made one Facebook post to a cyberpunk community, and all of a sudden, like, an army of people were like, "Where can we get more information?" I'm like, "Oh, I better create that fast."
SOON. Send. That's terrific. Really excited to play World Without Walls. I will most certainly play it because, as you know, and if you haven't heard through this entire interview, I'm a Shadowrun fan.
Sounds like it.
Cyberpunk fan.
Yep.
Very excited to play. And thank you again, Glenn. Is there anything, any parting words you want to say, or anything else you'd like to shill out that you're working on, or anything like that in the end here?
No, just if you're a game developer or you want to be a game developer, consider Boston.
Awesome.
Because I think a lot of people think California, a lot of people think Austin, Montreal. The community here is interesting, and it's growing all the time, and it's a strong community.
Boston's huge too. A lot of people.
We have our monthly meetings. The whole developer community,
That's right.
And I've heard from other people from other who have come from other cities that they're shocked at how strong the community and the connection is here. So we're just keeping Boston in indie development alive and well, and it's always evolving. But yeah, so look into it. Look at what's here. I mean, I think a lot of people want to get into games sometimes to make a BioShock, and they don't realize. I mean, Arcane isn't here, but a lot of the immersive sim companies, like we're all over here. So
right.
Or if you're a studio, I guess there are bigger concerns like taxes in the state of Massachusetts, but it's a good place to start up too. It's a good place to relocate, whatever.
So, I believe it. I've been to Boston myself. Fantastic city. Absolutely loved it.
Yep.
Well, that is going to be. Oh, go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
Been here my whole life. That's all.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. So.
Oh, local. I'm just joking. But no, that will be the end. We were interviewing Glenn Morris of Shadowrun's World Without Walls mod that's going to be coming out. Prologue episode will be coming out the end of December. You have to own Shadowrun Hong Kong in order to play it. But you can look forward to that. To remind me the website, please, again? The mod website. So
you can follow us at moddatabase.com. The actual mod will probably be released on Steam Workshop and Nexus mods without releasing anywhere else. But those sources aren't particularly great for in-development stuff. So right now, our screenshots, our developer updates, and all that will be posted at moddatabase.com. And I mean, you can just look up World Without Walls, and I'm sure it will take you there. I know Shadowrun Hong Kong is not one of the ones games that sort of is on the drop-down menu of mods at Mod Database, but we're on there. If you search for it in the site or through Google, you'll find where we're at, and you can follow it. You can click a little button and get updates as they come.
Totally.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much.
Glenn, thank you.
Yeah.
Greatly appreciated. And to everybody out there, again, thank you for watching another Dev Duels. We had Glenn Morris of World Without Walls, a mod created for Shadowrun Hong Kong. Once again, Prologue episode will be released at the end of December. Thank you, everybody, and have a great night.
Thank you. Bye.
I double wave. 2 hands makes it more obvious.